Welcome to the PBL Simplified podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Stoyer, and we've got a PBL showcase today, of course, because it's the second Wednesday of the month. And I would say the part that's not, of course, is we've got a published author on the podcast today, and that's Andrew Larson. He published a book called Life's a Project, the 6A's of Project-Based Learning, and it's going to come out through PBL Press right here at Magnify Learning. So we're super excited to have Andrew on the podcast today to talk about his new book. Andrew, thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Happy to be here.
Yeah, we're going to talk through, we're going to give some teasers. We're going to tease some things up so that people can, right now, if you're listening live, like as it comes out, you can pre-order. The book will be out May 14th. Super excited. It's going to have a book study along with it. If you pre-order, you can get all the goodies along with it. So the book's teed up, but now let's dive into talking to Andrew here a little bit. Because you're on the podcast, everybody gets the same first question, and that is, what is your why for the work that you do?
Okay, well, thank you for that. I became a teacher originally, so I went to college to teach biology, and back then, my original why was I wanted everyone to care about the environment. That's kind of where I started, um, and then that's not changed, but it's broadened a lot. And I think that if so from my perspective today, a lot about, um, I care a lot about literacy and making sure that students are capable of digesting and processing and analyzing information. So, just information literacy and in its pure sense. Um, and, ultimately, I think what I care about most is that our, we have an informed citizenry. I think that, um, you know, the kind of information that kids or that people encounter and digest and make decisions with have to be you've got to have the tools um, to parse that out with fidelity. So at the end of the day, I've kind of been teaching language arts for a few years now. It's not where I started, but I've been heavily influenced by my peers that do that kind of work, and so yeah.
Yeah, why don't you? I should have done more of that in your introduction, but why don't you tell us where you teach, kind of what you teach, and you teach a lot of different things. So maybe kind of talk about that and how they even fit together.
I Like I said, my background is in science and life science. Currently, I facilitate a botany class, which is awesome. It's kind of I mean, not to sound cliche, but it's kind of a dream come true. I went to Purdue and ended up with a botany degree. So I'm first time in my career really that I'm doing that. And then I co-facilitate a class called Global Science Perspectives. It's ninth grade English
Yeah.
and environmental studies. So I have a co-facilitator who happens to be a good friend of mine. Um, and yeah, and any other given year, I do advanced or AP biology. Of course, we have an advisory course, which is life skills and career exploration. Tons of fun. And I've been an advisor for senior internships and a smattering of other science electives over the years.
Yeah, and you're teaching at CSA New Tech in Columbus, Indiana, which is one of our national PBL model schools. If you want to see amazing project-based learning, that's where you go. So you did hear like ninth grade, ninth graders doing PBL, AP biology doing PBL. Like uh, one of the reasons that I'm super excited about the book coming out is I've kind of couched it this way is that it's like if somebody wanted to sit down and have a cup of coffee with you, Andrew, this is how they do it. right? And say, well, what do you know about PBL? It's like, well, that's actually going to be like 24 cups of coffee. Is what that's going to take for us to like kind of figure that out. So I feel I like it here. Like in 200 pages, you can do that because you give us just a little bit of everything. You give us kind of your story along with this teaching saga that you've had of really being on the forefront of project-based learning and the forefront of assessment and doing this work in a really deliberate way. So again, the title of the book is Life's a Project, the 6 A's of project-based learning, but you and I cannot take claim of the 6 A's. Like, where do the 6 A's come from?
A woman named Adria Steinberg coined the term the 6 A's, and so Adria was an educator in Rhode Island, I believe, and so she wrote this book, and the focus was on a sort of a vocational education program. I got to talk to Adria on a Zoom a few years ago. I was really starstruck. She's an incredibly approachable person, but I just couldn't believe that I was speaking with her. When I first started doing PBL, this 6 A's rubric cropped up somewhere with her name on it, and I don't, I don't know. I can't remember if it was through the New Tech Network or if it was through one of our original, um, PBL training programs, but it was there, and so this framework of hers, she really felt like it was it was the way that you holistically educated kids to embrace the myriad of challenges that adult life presents. It's a really beautifully well balanced approach, which combines the so-called soft skills and academic rigor that school is all about in a way that just really, I don't know, it speaks to me, and so when um, when I first got serious about sort of unpacking the 6 A's, it occurred to me that, like, this framework could be a book for sure. So
Sure.
yeah.
Well, I mean, project-based learning, the 6 A's seems to crop up. Like if you do a Google search of PBL and the 6 A's, it pops up everywhere. And I do think there's such an inspirational piece to this of, oh, I hadn't thought of that. I hadn't thought of that. Let me give our audience the 6 A's real quick. Authenticity, active exploration, applied learning, academic rigor, assessment practices, adult relationships, and Andrew, it looks like you threw in one extra one, a seventh A, if you will, and aspirations, which we'll get to in our conversation. And it's really just this way that I found, in the classroom of like, why was this PBL so awesome? Like, why did this one work, right? Or why did this one flop, right? Why did this one not work? And it seems like if you go back to the 6 A's, you can usually kind of use some detective work to figure that out. Do you think that's fair?
Yep. I do, and I think that there's a caveat, which is that it's really rare that you have a project that really hits in all of those categories. Like if you do, then I got dogs coming in. If you do, then you've really struck gold. Like you've really come on to something. And so I think that instead, the way I tend to approach it is um, is that if you think of it in terms of a whole year,
Mm,
that maintaining balance in those sort of six directions is a really surefire way to make to make sure that your course is going to be high quality. And I think the reason I say that is because the work is hard, and if you're new at it, if you try to hit all 6 A's perfectly, then it's it's going to be hard, and you're going to end up frustrated. And so throughout the book, I encourage people to kind of cut themselves a break, and perfection is overrated, and
yeah.
so
Yeah, you let's stay there for a second because you and I are both big fans of John Acuff. I bring him up on the podcast all the time.
Yes.
So that idea of perfection is overrated.
Yep.
I feel like sometimes teachers get stuck in there, right, of trying to be perfect. So I think you
Yep.
do a great job throughout the book, but can you give us kind of a blurb on that too? This perfection's overrated. How do you apply that?
Yeah. Perfection is the opposite of done, right? And so
Yeah.
that's an Acuff, um, euphemism. And so, I know, so I can think of colleagues that I have, and I mean my own experience too. But like, you have this idea for a project, and it's like, oh man, this is perfect, and there's just paralysis with starting because
Mhm.
it's just like this is going to take so much work to make this all happen. And um, historically, I've had projects like that just never got off the ground because of the insurmountable amount of preparation it would take. And so, what I found was that if I just, take the essential pieces and do those first, and just kind of give myself permission to, improve it the next year and the year after that, then they always improve. They never get worse.
That's good.
So yeah, I have, in the chapter there on aspirations, there's probably my favorite example, which is from a colleague of mine, Gail Knowles, who teaches physics, and she really loves electricity. That's her thing, and so, she had told me long ago. She's like, when I'm done teaching, I'm going to go become a licensed electrician. I'm like, that's an awesome idea. And so she, one year built like these wooden frames with a couple of outlets and switches, and she would have her kids wire them up, and she would have these lab practical exams where they had to, take a circuit diagram and replicate it in real life in this thing. And so that was like one year. And then the next year, she's like, wouldn't it be cool if we could take this and like go work on some Habitat for Humanity house somewhere in town? And so she did. They found one, and she got some certified licensed electricians to help, and they rewired their house. And then she thought, well, man, if I can do this, then why don't we just go to the lower Ninth Ward in New Orleans and find some houses that have been devastated by by Hurricane Katrina, and work on those. So she did it incrementally, and
Right.
all of that all took, every bit of 6 years to get to that point. So she didn't just jump in and say, "I'm taking kids to New Orleans and here we go." That
Right.
would have been that would have been crazy. So
Yeah, that's such a good progression because I think when people move into PBL year one, year two, or even when they come to CSA, they come to see you, you guys are doing your thing and they hear about the New Orleans project and these different things. It's like, yes, and it's awesome. And kids still talk about it, but that wasn't day one, right? Like there's still a progression. You aspire to these things and you work towards them.
yep,
I love the idea that projects don't get worse, they just get better. So like keep at it, right? Like keep going.
absolutely, yeah.
That's super good. Well, we're going to come back to aspirations again. Great place to start, right? So when you're looking at, I think one of the reasons I still like Life's a Project. I love this book. I think it's important to get it in people's hands. Is just that because you give kind of your career progression throughout this, so we can see kind of where you started. One of my favorite chapters is an assessment. I think people are gonna love the assessment chapter. It's like here's the rubric that I used to use, and we've used it. I've used it. Right? It's like, hey, kids, do more. You get a better grade. But then you give us an example where we go deeper, right? And you start
Yeah.
using surface, deep, and transfer um, language, right, to create rubrics that are more than just do more, get better grade. It's more go deeper, right? You're using depth of knowledge type verbs in here. Let's jump to that A if we can, that assessment A, because I think it's one of those. I don't know. I like all the A's, but I think when I think Andrew Larson, I also think like thought leader and assessment along with project based learning. So I want to give you a chance to talk about that a little bit. So wherever you want to go with it, like maybe the progression of kind of the original do more, do better rubric to a deeper one? What do you think?
Yeah, I remember. I remember it being in a workshop one year, and somebody had made a rubric, and I'm not picking on anybody, but they had a rubric where the advanced column there was sort of a reference to it was some project about cars, and I can't remember. It might have been middle school math or something, but in the advanced column there was something like you know if the student goes and spends a day at a car dealership, shadowing a car dealer, then that's advanced. And I thought, well, first of all, that's so unfair. It's like you have to have the ways and means to get to a car dealership. You got somebody to take you there, and you have to have the time and whatever else. But I think it's just so um and not that that wouldn't be an awesome experience because it would, but I think that it's so sort of second nature for teachers to just think about more instead of deeper, and you know do these three things, and you'll do well. But if it's five, you'll do better. And um, I was really inspired by Michael McDowell. He's a hero of mine and a friend. He wrote the foreword for the book, and so he's written lots and lots of books, including rigorous PBL by design, which is where I first learned about surface, deep, and transfer. I mean, I don't know if those are his terms, but that's where I learned it from.
The Project Habit's another great one by Michael as well. Developing these habits for
Yes.
PBLs. So yeah, he's a great place to grab
Yep.
some of this knowledge.
Yep. He wrote another one called Teaching for Transfer, which is whoa, it is not light reading. I read it, it's just kind of like every page you have to read it, and then your mind wanders for 5 minutes about all the things you should have done differently or whatever. But um, surface level learning is exactly what it sounds like. You've scratched the surface. You've learned the basic facts associated with a topic. It's the vocabulary. It's the lists and some categories. And so it's important information. And one of the things that Michael makes a real point, and left a big impression on me, is that the three categories are equally important. It's not like deep is more important and transfer is yet more important. They're all equally important, and they all deserve equal time. But nonetheless, so yeah, you do the basic building, you have the foundational knowledge, and then with deep level, what you're doing is kind of connecting dots. So you're taking various surface level bits, combining them so that what you're getting at is analyzing and explaining and comparing and contrasting, and those kinds of describing those kinds of action verbs. And then with transfer, you're really creating, you're really taking all of that, and you're doing something new with it. I mean, he even goes so far as to talk about near transfer and far transfer, which is even more interesting. Like, yeah, it kind of like, man, I mean, yeah, I would say that that everything I've learned about um, about surface deep and transfer levels started with that book. And then and he has said to me many times is that you're going to go and take this and make it your own, and there's going to be tons of trial and error, and that was completely true.
Yeah.
So I've been working at it for about 10 years, and I feel pretty good about it now, but I still feel like there's black holes.
Yeah, and let's try to figure out the balance maybe here a little bit, because I know like what it is that you're trying to grasp in here is because we've had participants in a workshop, and they're creating this rubric, and they even worked on it like it's a 3-day workshop, so they worked on it between days 2 and 3. They spent 4 hours on it, and most of their conversation was around like, well, if it's a good presentation versus a great presentation, like what does that mean? And we're trying to find the right adjective here to communicate, which I think is part of a rubric. But what is it that you're trying to grasp as you're working through assessment, um, as you're progressing through this continuum that you're on? What are you trying to grasp from maybe what you were doing 10 years ago to what you're getting into now?
Well, I can tell you that the thing that anyone who will listen, I'll tell them to make these rubrics, which are purely about content, and they have almost no context that is specific to a project. And so, in other words, you're not every time you create a new project, you might be so inclined to think, well, I need to go write a rubric for that project. And that's certainly what I used to do. I would write, to have a gardening project, and I was like, all right, well, I'm going to think about all the standards related to gardening, and turn that into this context specific thing. But then if that project didn't um, pan out, and I never wanted to do it again because I hated it, then I was just out of luck, and that time was gone. Um, and so now what I do is, and I just do this every time some new course comes along, is I will, and this is summer work, I'll write a rubric for every standard, or for every clump of standards. And it's just purely the science, or it's purely the literacy skills. And it's interchangeable then. It's like I can use this rubric for any ecology project. It doesn't matter if it's about invasive species, or if it's, about a creek restoration. It doesn't matter, because it's all food webs and that stuff. So and then, I mean, it's not that you only have to do it once, but you have this good foundation for a content rubric, and you can refine it and improve it as you find through experience that you need to. But it's hard to convince people that that's the way you should do it. I mean, maybe it's because it seems like a daunting thing. It's like a standard, a rubric for every standard, or group of standards, still sounds like a lot. And I mean, it kind of is, but it's, that's what I choose to do in the summer. If I'm doing school, if I'm floating on the lake, that's one thing. But if I'm doing school, I'm gonna make standards rubrics.
That's right. That's right. Uh, so if that piques somebody's interest that's listening, like it's in the book, it's on page 152. If you're watching on YouTube, we'll flash it up on the screen. If you're listening on the podcast, you got to pre-order the book, right, and get to page 152. But kind of walk through this process, and what I kind of hear you saying throughout the book is, uh, you've got a line in here where you can't assess something that you didn't teach, right? So
Yeah.
I guess I kind of feel like maybe you're on this journey of, hey, I taught this. How do I, fairly assess this?
Hmm.
Is that fair? Is that kind of the journey you're on, or is it you've also got this idea that um, that I love, and maybe this is worth touching on too, that if there's something you want in an end product, make it a checklist, right? If you want there to be a fancy background to the Google slides, make it a checklist, not a good background, great background, excellent background kind of thing.
Yes, absolutely. We all have specific look fors, with the final product. And there's no reason why you shouldn't have those specific look fors, because those are the kinds of things that the world of work demands. And for the most part, when an employer is saying, these are the things I look for, what they're doing is they're rattling off a list. I want it to be pretty, first and foremost. I want it to be easy to read. I want it to be, um, you know, cutting edge technology, or whatever. They're just going to rattle it off. There really aren't rubrics in most jobs. I mean, that is kind of an education thing. So, this, and kids like checklists. I mean, they're concrete. And so there's no reason why those two things can't coexist. And it's kind of funny because I remember a colleague of mine, we taught biology together, and she used to give kids checklists. And at first I turned up my nose. I'm like, oh, that's what is that? I mean, that's just too elementary. And um and I probably should text her and say, I was really wrong about that. I mean, I think you have to have both, yeah, but like, rubrics are good guides. I mean, they're not the end all be all to solve all problems. They provide good clarity, and that's
I
a
think,
wonderful thing for everyone involved, for student and teacher.
yeah, I do. I think you lay it out in the book that makes it a positive experience for both, and even for teachers, where, if you are taking up, like, have your pool time, but when you're doing school time, like, this is a tool that benefits you year after year.
Yeah.
And then before we move on to the next, another A, if somebody does want to get some more on Michael McDowell, we actually had him on the podcast. So episode 145, we'll put it in the show notes, and you can listen to my conversation with Michael McDowell. But let's jump
I
to
want
another
to,
A. What's that?
I want to listen to that.
Yeah, you got to get that one.
Yeah.
He's fantastic.
Yeah.
And the more I get into his books, I don't even know if this was actually in the episode or if it was pre or post, but he's just like, I like to write books. Like, Michael, I like that that you like to write books. Because keep doing that, brother.
Yep.
So, in the A, academic rigor, in the book is page 128. You've got this idea. Here's the sentence. It says, simply put, PBL goes further and deeper into the content than the standards often stipulate. You've got a graphic of depth of knowledge verbs on here, but PBL goes further and deeper into the content than the standards often stipulate. Can you pull the thread on that?
Yeah, so what we say is that PBL has so many value added pieces. It's I think any school can teach the standards, and with PBL, we're asking kids to learn the standards and learn them well, and then and apply them in authentic ways that solve real world problems, and sort of shine a light on the ways where these standards are present in life, and all of life's rich challenges. So I think that, all things being equal, I know you have talked on many episodes about the performance on tests and things. So project-based learning is, if nothing more, I mean, even if scores are the same, it's this value-added component where students are getting a rich insight into why school matters. Like the whole, why do we have to learn this? I mean, a good project, it should be pretty evident, self-evident, and it should be pretty obvious why these things exist in school, because they exist in life.
Right. Yeah. So we're going to uncover and master the standards, and right, we're going to apply them into a real authentic scenario. Authenticity being another A that you cover. You've got this through line that goes throughout the book as well, around the importance of the teacher in a PBL classroom, the facilitator. And there's kind of
Yeah,
this myth out there that the students kind of Lord of the Flies and somehow it ends up good, right? And so you tackle that myth straight on. Can you talk about the importance of a facilitator in the classroom?
I would love to. I mean, so I think a lot of schools, a lot of administrators, a lot of teachers have this misconception that in PBL, it's students running the show. There's certainly a lot of really impressive, inspiring showcases of student work where students are running the thing. It's clear that they are, but in the behind the curtains, the teachers are either are or should be providing the very specific scaffolding to help get kids to that point. And it's it's the job of a professional educator to create a sequence. This is the obvious first step, and this is the obvious next step, and it's obvious to a trained professional educator, but it's not obvious to students, or at least not most students. And there are very few students that you'll encounter that truly want teachers to get out of the way and just let them do their thing. That's not a dig on teenagers or any student. It's just human nature. They're just not, they're not at that point in their development where they can manage all of the abstractions of learning a thing with fidelity, unless there is a teacher that's guiding that process. And these days with learning management systems, you can lay things out really sequentially, or less sequentially. It doesn't all have to be lockstep, but yeah, we've found, and I teach high school, but ninth grade nonetheless, and they thrive in the structure that we give them. And I would be the first to admit that at 12th grade there's less structure. They're further along. Their brains are different organs at that point in their life, and so developmentally appropriate facilitation is just fundamental to it working.
Yeah, but I think some people would maybe be surprised that, here in the conclusion, towards the end, even you're talking about have a routine, right? And throughout the book, you mentioned word of the day, independent reading time, uh, very structured journaling time, right? To get kids into literacy and writing. So these routines are part of your classroom,
Yes.
right?
Yes, they are. And I'll be the first to admit that, my teaching partner, who comes from a more traditional background, I learned from everybody. And he was he was a big influence on me in that respect. He's like, been doing these things. I know they work. And, let's try to marry them together. And it's kind of funny, like, we have block schedule, 87 minutes. And part of that came out of, um, you know, he just made a comment about maybe 2 months or so into our co-teaching relationship, where he's like, I just, I, don't- I feel like we're like micro planning everything, and it's just too much. And I'm like, all right, I'm listening. What do you think? And so he kind of put this forward, and it's been a real savior, on the sanity end of things. We kind of know what's going to happen. And I mean, kids benefit from the structure. There's no question. Um, and not to mention, these are SAT words. These are
Yeah.
serious vocabulary words. No joke. And so there's a lot of really good literacy that coexists with kind of outside of the project context.
Well, I think that's, as we define really great PBL environments, intentional innovation, I think, is super important, just to figure out, what's working in our ecosystem where we're at, right? So it's like skill and drill. Okay, that's bad. Maybe, like, where does it have a place where it fits, or is there some kind of a continuum or pendulum? Like, maybe it does fit somewhere. There's not a whole lot of, people will say, well, what do you have to do PBL well? Well, it's a really tough question, right? There's a lot of different things that make PBL work in different scenarios and different ecosystems.
Yeah.
So Andrew, I want to skip to the seventh A that you've created, right? So 6A's are what Adria has that creates really great PBL environments, but I like this last one that you have called aspirations, right? There's this idea of, you know, you call it this. It's a simple act of asking what if. So where's the power of aspiration and the power of the what if question?
Absolutely. And so, I'm lucky to be surrounded by a lot of people who just love to spitball big ideas. And those big ideas sometimes they might sit in the corner for years, but they're there. Somebody brought it up. A really nice thing to have somewhere on your wall is a parking lot. A parking lot for great ideas. And so some of those parking lot ideas, you walk past it every day and you glance at it, and every time you think about it a little bit more. And yeah, and but on a more sort of everyday level, you might have a project where um, it just starts small, and you just think, well, this is what I can manage for now, but what
Mhm.
if I have momentum, and these things work out, and we get a little money or whatever, and we could go with it. So, like, my personal favorite example would be back in the pandemic. So I was having to sort of think of things that kids could do from home, and so I was having them gather seeds, tree seeds, and trying to grow them, and like, none of them grew at first, and that was in part because we weren't together and they didn't know what they were doing and whatever. But we took that idea, and each year we built it a little bit, and as it sits now, 4 years later, we have across the street from our school a tree nursery, with I don't know, about 53-year-old trees planted in it. And here in a couple weeks, we're going to dig up one of those trees, and we're going to go and plant it at one of our community partners' properties, just as a sort of a token of goodwill for the help that he's given us. And across the street, there's this outdoor indoor sports complex owned by the city parks, and we're going to grow trees for them. And it all started from just a real basic iteration of, I really like trees and I want kids to learn how to grow trees. Let's see where we can go from here, given a few years. So and I honestly feel like the tree nursery is like one of my absolute proudest accomplishments in terms of something that we've been able to pull off, and feel like, yep, I can retire now. I mean, somebody can roll with it from here. But I mean, it was as a real milestone for me. So, and it was
Yeah.
our kids just, they've really embraced the whole idea of what it means to do something big like that.
Well, it's such a big deal, and these are the things of, like, I think we talked earlier about going above and beyond standards, right? Like, when you grow a tree, right, like, it's something that's going to be there 20 years from now. Like, how many things are any of us doing where it's going to be like, man, 20 years from now, like, you know, getting teenagers to think 20 years ahead, it's such a big win. It's not a standard. It's not something anybody's asking us to do. But kind of in your opening of your why, it's like we're trying to create informed citizens that care about their environment and their world and relationships. And how
Yeah.
growing a tree, I feel like that's one, right? Because it's like, you know uh, so I just love it. So as we look at this book, Life's a Project, and I mean, you've run workshops, you've done consulting with schools, you've done a lot of this work, you've been in the classroom, innovating for a real long time at this point, my friend. Who do you think is going to benefit from this book? Like, who do you want to make sure, like, it gets into their hands? What type of teacher, or how would you define that?
Yeah. It's not necessarily a beginner book. I mean, I think
Yeah, I
I
think that's
think
fair.
yeah, I think it's for teachers who have tried, and they have big questions about, well, should I have thought of this, done this, and like, and also it's also for somebody who is really thinking about doing project-based learning sort of over the course of a year, as opposed to a one-off.
Hmm.
you know so it's like developing the routines and the mindset to do it over the longer term, and at a year or more, a year, 10, whatever. So i I think those kinds of people are the ones who should read it the most. And I think um, I think the administrators need to get their
Mm,
nose in it, because I think assessment systems are by and large a sort of a larger category or hierarchy, and to do assessment better, you can't be in a silo. You got to have a whole bunch of people who are trying it together, because there's going to be successes and failures. And um, so I think the administrators kind of create that,
mm,
or at least department chairs, or whatever, but somebody at the next level up from a classroom. So those are the groups that come to mind immediately. And then, of course, anybody, it's called Life's a Project, because for me, I'm in large part inspired by stuff that happens outside of the classroom. And so I think that people who are sort of education curious in general should read it, because there's a tremendous amount of overlap between the stuff that happens out there in the big world and the stuff that happens in a PBL classroom. It's you know our classrooms are more real. I think I can say that. They are more real than most. And so yeah, that's my shameless way of saying everybody should just go and buy it and read this book. But you know, it's
everybody,
fun. It's fun to just give people a lens into the classroom that don't otherwise have it.
I think so. I'm not exactly sure how to like convey this to the audience, but I think you did a great job of, um, because you give us a peek into kind of a personal and education life, like your stories overlap. There's a real accessibility to it. So we maybe talked about some pretty geeky assessment practices, but it's couched in these stories that are super approachable, that you are drawing, kind of this life's a project. Like it's definitely applying even for teachers, right? Like you talk about how PBL has kind of changed your life and opened
Yeah.
things up. So yeah, everybody needs to get this book, right? And then you also need to get one for a friend because they need it too. So uh,
Uh-huh.
I think if you're a veteran PBLer, I think for sure like it's a no brainer. Like that's like what is it? The one click on Amazon, just one click it. Um, and I like the idea of administrators too, because there's some structures in here that need to be, that it's helpful to have them in place to support teachers. And I wonder about, what about Andrew, like in year 15 when you were still kind of teaching traditionally, but you had an itch, like there was something like, hey, I think there's more to this whole teacher thing. Like this isn't exactly how I always wanted to teach. I wonder about this book as an inspiration piece of like, well, let me look at this PBL thing. I've heard some myths, I've heard some things, but what is somebody who's like gone into this deep? What's that look like?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I when I read McDowell's book, it was several kind of levels over my head, and it really propelled me to kind of ratchet up my learning. So I think this book could be that for some people.
Mm,
Like I was 10 years in a traditional setting, and I was really starting to get quite bored. And I didn't know what I wanted. I just knew I wanted something more and more authentic. And so, I mean, I think that quite assuredly, this book could answer that question for people, to a level that I didn't have. At the end
mhm.
of the day, I mean, I want this book to shorten the learning curve for people
Yeah.
to get into to get into authentic learning with kids.
Yeah, gosh, I would plus one that gets me excited about that audience because I went from engineering to teaching and taught traditionally for a while, and it's like this isn't what I want, right? This isn't why I moved from engineering to teaching, and I feel like Life's a Project gives me that because there's such an aspirational field that even if some of the assessment stuff, which would have been way over my head at the time, the aspiration was like, yes, that's how I want to teach, right? Like those are the experiences I want my learners to have. These are experiences I want to bring, um, and then it would have taken me, a decade to move into those. But I think the inspiration is there. And then I think there's a lot of ways to grow into that, and a lot of encouragement for teachers to give themselves permission to grow into that. So,
Yep. And to just embrace the idea of being imperfect and just kind of trying some things and building on it.
yep, so
Don't
good.
fix it all once.
All right. So if you want to have a cup of coffee with Andrew Larson and talk about PBL, 42 cups of coffee, maybe, you grab a copy of the book. Andrew, thanks for coming on to talk about the book today. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a great chat. I appreciate you, Ryan. Thanks.
All right, PBL Simplified audience, that was your chat with Andrew Larson, the author of Life's a Project, the 6 A's of project-based learning. Again, if you're listening to this podcast, you're a movement maker. Like, you're here for a reason. And you should you should one click this in Amazon. Make sure you pre-order it so that you get all the freebies that come along with it. And once you do, like, give us some feedback on that, right? Like, let's get back to Andrew on that. He can answer some questions for you. We can have him back on the podcast to answer those questions just like we do. So you can go to pblshare.com. You can put those questions in there, and then we can have another episode talking about the book once it's out, which sounds super exciting, which is an idea we just came up with, but I think it's going to be awesome. So, so do that. And then as you do that, you're going to go out there and you're going to create learning environments that are absolutely spectacular, where you're uncovering and crushing standards, applying them authentically, and creating awesome experiences for your kids. So go out and lead inspired.